Okay. I guess it's time to let them in.
Why don't you slide, and then I can come in and out of there. That was when you need.
Okay.
Okay.
We will either mute them all or well, I can ask as well. So would everyone please mute your iPad or phone or whatever so that your Zoom call is not sharing all the sound, and then we will have you on mute when you are talking, okay? I'm going to actually wait. Can everyone mute, please? I see some people are trying still to connect, and we'll give them a second. All right. So if we need to help with muting people along the way, we can do that. Tonight we are here to have a police forum to discuss the policies that we have currently. We have asked our community to submit questions ahead of time so that we could have some time to prepare for answers. That doesn't mean there won't be other questions that are coming up and that we will be addressing as a commission and as a community. But we do appreciate those that have given feedback and added to the questions so that we, our city staff had time to address them. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start with a policy discussion, and we're going to have Michael and I think Chief Johnson, wherever and wherever that applies, going through some of our policies in not like extended detail, because that would take us days probably to go from or through everything, but looking at everything or all our policies and what we do in the structure or authority related to Montana code, and then our internal kind of processes, which are generally related to Montana code as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael, and he is going to start by looking through or discussing with the commission, with the community, just the process and what we do and how we go about certain structuring of policy, etc. And I'm going to leave it to him to present for a while, and then we will go to the second step, which is more discussion and question time. Okay, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to do a real short overview, just for people that may not have time to review some of the things we're looking at. We'll just cover basic structure, basic functioning, how things work. So when we talk about issues, we can tell where the authority lies and who actually has the authority to change things. So hold on just a second. I'm going to share a screen with you. So this is a real basic chart of what the police department looks like. Montana code gives the city manager overall authority over the police department. So the city manager has to, is the final approving authority for policies. But in general, the main duties of the city manager are hiring, firing, to include the chief of police, and disciplinary action if it needs to come up to that level. You can see the police commission is kind of off to the side there. They are required by Montana code, but their main purpose is to review candidates that come before, that come to the city looking to be hired into the police department. So usually that is done through a testing period where we get some results from almost a conglomerate that does it for us. We pick candidates, they come before us, they also come before the police commission, and the police commission reviews the candidates we're looking to hire. The chief of police has day-to-day control over the entire department. In Livingston, that includes the 911 communications. A lot of places it doesn't, that falls under the county, but in Park County,
Hey,
city. Was that Chair?
Michael, can you wait one moment? You're cut off,
Sure.
and I'm wondering out, and I've lost most of what you just said. If everyone could, all the participants could stop their video so they can hear, but try to not use the video, that'd be great. I'm just looking here. So if we could get as many people as possible to stop sharing their video for a few until you are up for talking or for questions, please try to stop the video now. I see Patricia S. Wheeler. That would help. Thank you. Okay, Michael, can you try again? I don't know if other people couldn't hear you, but I definitely could not.
Okay, we'll just go back and cover that real quick. So the structure, as you see before you, is city manager in charge of overall policies, to include hiring and firing and selection of the chief of police. The police commission is there for reviewing of candidates that come in. So after our candidates go through the interview process, they are reviewed by the police commission. That is a requirement by Montana state code. And they can, there is an allowance in state code for them to review discipline as requested by the officers. Although in practice, I don't think that's ever been done here. That usually goes through the union and not through the police commission, but it is available to the officers if they so choose. Chief of police, Chief Johnson, is in charge of day-to-day operations to include training, how things will be administered, scheduling, those kind of things. He has an assistant chief of police that helps him with those duties, which really allows him to focus more on the strategic aspect and not the day-to-day management. Then underneath the assistant chief of police, we have the 911 dispatch communications, the school resource officer, our detective, our sergeants, and then under the sergeants are the patrol officers. So that's kind of a broad overview of how the department is structured. Each of those authorities is fairly clearly outlined in Montana State Code, especially for the city manager and the chief of police, as well as the police commission. The rest of it is basically up to the city and how they'd like to set it up and run it. So when you're looking at organization is really set by the city manager and the chief of police. Together, we look at how we want it structured, how many officers are needed, what kind of officers are needed, and what their roles will be. That includes the communication officers as well, not just the officers, patrol officers. As far as training goes, training falls under the chief of police, but is usually executed by the assistant chief. Training is a significant portion of what is required of officers, especially new officers. All new officers have to go through the Montana Law Enforcement Academy before they can be out on their own. And then they also must go through on-the-job training with a field training officer before they're allowed to patrol on their own. Same is true of communications officers. They must go with a trainer as well through their first, I think, 6 months before they're allowed to be on a shift by themselves. The main training issues that people had asked about or were concerned about were anti-bias training. If you had time to read this, which I won't read to you, the Montana Law Enforcement Academy is the first place they're introduced to anti-bias training. And the anti-bias training itself is a 6-hour block. Here in Montana at the Academy, they call it the Fair and Impartial Policing. That's the curriculum they follow. And it's a really great introduction. But they point this out, and I think this is a great thing to understand, is while that is where the anti-bias training takes place, that is reinforced or it is readdressed in many other portions of their training. In the use of force training, in the community policing training, in their ethics training, in the history of policing training, in their risk management training, in their cultural awareness training, in their emotional intelligence training. So in all of those training blocks, some of which I think meet some of the needs that people were asking about, there also are anti-bias aspects to that. So they're well immersed in it at the Academy, even before they come to us in the Livingston Police Department, and then we build on that training from there. The other portion of training that brought the most concern, or at least has been in the news most, is the use of force training. This probably also applies when people talk about de-escalation training. It's really all one issue. It's what is the appropriate use of force, what level, and for how long. Use of force is a in and of itself, that could be a couple-hour topic. And officers are trained on that both at the Academy, once they come to the PD, and with their field training officer as well. This graphic we use is really, this isn't used for the police department. They use much more complicated models than this, but this is a breakdown just to make it easily understandable of what the purpose of use of force is. It basically categorizes force into 5 general areas, and it looks for 2 things. What is the officer's perception of the situation? What is the officer's response to that situation? And those 2 things should match up. So they should match across the tier. If a citizen that they're interacting with is compliant, then cooperative controls are all that's required. So it's just asking them to do things. Please step out of your car. Please move to the sidewalk. And there is no actual use of force. And then as the situation escalates, depending if it does, it can go to any one of these tiers at any time. But the important part, and this is the de-escalation part, is it can also go back down at any time. A citizen, someone's being arrested, may get resistive initially. They're upset, they don't know what's going on. Once they understand what's going on, they might go back down to compliant. The officer should also de-escalate at that time to come back down to cooperative controls. So use of force is really driven by whoever is interacting with the officer. The officer perceives what their response is and then chooses the appropriate level of force to go with that. Hopefully we spend most of our time in the first tier and we return to the first tier as soon as possible if it escalates beyond that. So that's the overall concept of use of force. It is a complicated and quickly changing concept. So from our policy manual, this list, bulleted list here, are all the things that we say an officer should consider when looking at use of force, either level or duration. So there's just a ton of issues. The severity of the crime. So if it's not a significant crime, we probably don't want to escalate up to deadly force. Whether the subject poses a threat, whether they're actively resisting. Is it a rapid situation or is it something where you have time to step back and think and find different solutions? What do we know about the subject themselves? Do they have mental health issues? Do they have actual health issues? How does that play into it? If there's alternative methods of finding the subject later, are there other officers to exist? Is there other things going on around the situation that require that situation to be resolved quickly? So you can think of, you're looking at one person that may be arrested and someone thinks they suddenly need to get involved from the side. That's something you need to take care of quickly because it's not actually the main focus of what's going on. So that's one of the factors that they have to consider as they go forward. What's the size, weight, and age of the subject compared to the officer? What are their physical abilities? How many subjects are we talking about? Are there any weapons? Is there any known history of violence? Are there other innocent people in the area or potential victims? And whether or not you could capture the subject later without jeopardizing the officers or other people. Just thinking about that list at your desk is difficult, but running through that entire list in a second or two while you're trying to make a decision about what kind of force to use is incredibly difficult. So when we talk about it's a complicated issue, these are the issues we're talking about. They're easy to look at afterwards, and that's why when we look at that standard, that use of force, and it says the reasonable officer's perception, state law basically says when you look at these things, you look at them understanding what an officer in that situation with the time constraints would consider. You don't have the luxury of sitting back and considering all the factors as they came to light later using 20/20 vision. So when the law looks at use of force, it says, what would a reasonable officer have perceived? And then were the actions they took to that perception also reasonable? And so that's really the standard that everyone looks at when we're looking at use of force. Both anti-bias training or all training and use of force policy are part of our overall policy for the police department. We do have a policy manual for the police department that's developed by the chief and signed off by the city manager. And in it is where we list how we're going to police, which is different than what we're going to police. And I'll just put that distinction out there right now. What we are going to police is determined by either federal, state, county, or city ordinances. That is what we're going to police. So that determines, is it a 2-hour parking zone? How long can your trailer be on the street? What's a partner family member assault? All those are what we're going to police, and they're determined by ordinance. So those are issues that need to come before the commission, the city commission, if it's a city ordinance, they need to go to state lawmakers if it's a state law, or would need to go to federal lawmakers if it's a federal law. So when we're talking about things tonight, we're really talking about how we police more than what we police. So how we police is this policy and other policies that the department uses. So you can see that's just the table of contents for our policy manual. And it's pretty extensive, and the document itself is 100 pages plus, but it covers a lot of things. It covers ethics, how we arrest, pursuit policies, use of force is obviously one of them, partner family member assault, how we use tasers, tire deflating, canines, prisoner transport, juvenile offenders, sexual violent offenders, radar, bicycle policy, school resource officer, racial profiling / bias profiling policy, personnel complaint policy, mutual assistance policy, persons with mental disorders, how employees can use social networking, body armor and mounted patrol. And then there's some addendums that cover complaint forms and how we do that. So all of those policies are already addressed by the city of Livingston. And some of them, I'd say most of them actually are really well addressed. They're addressed very well in the document. They're very in-depth. If you haven't read through that, especially in any items in here that you're specifically interested in, I would recommend it. I think it is posted out there on our webpage for your review. And so all that is available, and I won't go through any of those specifically right now. The other thing that is out there is a collective bargaining agreement. So this is an agreement between the city of Livingston, and in our case, it is the Montana Federation of Public Employees Livingston Police Unit. So that's the police union. The CBA in general is things that you don't see in the policing aspects. It's more administrative, what counts as holidays, how are people paid. But there are things in there that do affect policy and inform policy, but most of those are already constrained by either state or federal law or even Supreme Court decisions. I think the ones that most people are interested in this case is the disciplinary procedures for our police department. The CBA defines the 5 types of discipline, and these are pretty standard across most organizations, especially most public organizations. For any action, the city has at its disposal either verbal counseling, written reprimands, suspensions without pay, demotions, and terminations. So discipline is going to fall into one of those 5 categories. In general, it will be, you will move up that scale. You'll start with verbal counseling and move up that scale as if behavior doesn't change. However, if for some reason it's an egregious violation of our policies, you can start at any one of those. So depending on what it is, you could start at termination. However, there's a lot of requirements when you go through a disciplinary process, and it's not only for police unions, it's not even only for unions, but for any public employee, and really any employee, the state has protections for them based on the same protections you would receive if you were in a legal situation. Basically, it is, you have to go through their due process rights. So we can't jump directly to a termination. We can't jump directly even to a verbal reprimand unless we have already done the investigation that goes with that. Sometimes that's super simple. If a supervisor sees something, that is enough of an investigation, especially for lower level discipline, and they can move immediately to verbal reprimand. However, if it's a complaint from outside of the department or outside of the city, then we have to go through the investigation process and verify the information. And so a lot of times people are concerned about officers who are suspended with pay. That actually doesn't happen, at least not here. What may happen is if we are in the investigation process and we do not want an officer or any other employee for that matter to be working on the job because we're unsure of the status of what they've done, we will put them on administrative leave. During administrative leave, they will get paid because they haven't been found guilty of anything yet. They haven't been deemed to have violated any city policy or law. And so during that time frame, if you see someone on administrative leave, that's the process that's used to determine if they have wrongdoing. Once wrongdoing is established, at that point, then they will receive one of the disciplines, the 5 types that we've talked about. If that type is suspension, it is always without pay. You are never suspended with pay for a violation that would require suspension. So that's often misunderstood. There's also some, I'd say some complexity if what is being accused is also a criminal act, because the criminal proceeding is a completely different process than the city disciplinary proceeding. The city can actually compel employees to answer questions in a city investigation for disciplinary procedures. However, you cannot compel someone to answer in a legal proceeding. So if you do compel an employee to answer questions in an investigation for city discipline, that is not admissible in a legal case. And there's precedents for that, and it will tell you there's reasons that that works. But sometimes people get confused between the 2 processes, the disciplinary process and the legal process, which is separate. It would have completely different investigation and interview requirements. And then the last topic we'll just cover really quickly is cameras. The city is currently looking at purchasing body cameras for officers. We were able to find some solutions that teamed up with cameras that we already possessed, which were in all of the cars. And so we will move forward with that. We are getting a quote right now. Storage is really the biggest administrative problem with that. There's a lot of storage requirements that come with it. But the system we're looking at actually ties into the current system that we have in the police cruisers. They should be able to talk to each other, and it will allow better coverage and better accountability for both the citizens and the officers so that we know what's going on. The amount of training that officers go through while they're both in the academy and here in Livingston once they start the job is extensive. And there's a lot of information that we do. But I would like to add that it's not just the police department that requires that kind of training. The city is right now looking at trying to implement a more online-based version of that training that can be more often, but shorter training segments so that people can get snippets of training more often. Some research is finding that's more effective. People don't have the attention span to sit down at a computer for 45 minutes or 2 hours and watch a long video. But if we do it like YouTube videos and make it 8 to 12 minutes, people can sit through that. And so we're looking at that not only for officers, but for all city employees on some of these important issues. Anti-bias training is not just a police department issue, it's a city issue. If you have bias in one department, it's unlikely that you don't have it in any other department. So you need to make sure that people in all departments are trained on it and they understand implicit bias or any other kind of bias that they may hold and how that's not acceptable in the city dealing with the public. So those are some of the issues outside of just the police department that we're looking at that would also involve the police department. But hopefully that's a pretty quick overview, and I would like to leave most of the time to answer any specific questions.
Michael, you were cutting out just a little bit at the end. I'm not sure what you just said.
Just wrapped it up and turn it back over to you for questions so that we can get to the community's concerns.
All right. I couldn't hear that part. Sorry. So before we move on to more our question and answer section, I just want to remind people about why we're here and how it needs to look as far as process. And so we are here to discuss our policies of our police department, to and have questions answered that and concerns that people may have. We also need to remember to not speak out of turn. That with Zoom, it's sometimes hard to do that, but you need to wait to be called on, just like at any commission meeting. State your name and address, just like any meeting, public meeting that we do have. And that if it turns to a place of conflict and inappropriate interaction, then we will have you removed from the meeting as we would at any meeting. And I know how passionate we are about this issue. And so I really am glad that we're having this forum and that we're hearing from everyone, the city, the police, and the community about this passionate issue that has become a very big issue nationally, and that we can look at in our community as to what we are doing, what we're doing well, what we have concerns about, and go from that. But please remember to also put your name in the chat when you would like to ask a question, and we will call on you, or I will call on you. Okay, that's the easiest way, so we are not interrupting each other. Anything else? I want to start it with commission, just making sure we haven't missed anything in particular that we need to address. Commissioners, do you have anything else from what I just said?
Chair Hoagland, can I?
Go ahead, Melissa.
No, I appreciate what you just said. The only other thing I was thinking could be useful for the community is if Michael could share where I think they're yearly reports that the chief puts together, and it analyzes it's sort of like the year at a glance from the police force. And that's some interesting information for folks who are wanting to have like a broader picture of what our police are doing. Is that possible to maybe screen share so people can see where to find that?
Michael?
So to get to any of these things, if you go, I'll go back to the homepage so it's easier to see. So if you go to our homepage and then you go to government and then to police, it covers some of the basic information, but on the left-hand side is where you're going to get a lot of your information. There's crime prevention, annual reports, which is what Commissioner Newts was talking about. Those have a lot of information in them based on arrests, use of force. It has both, I think, gender and race statistics on stops and arrests. All that is in those reports. And then this Livingston overview is what we were just talking about. And so you can get in there and look at the review that we just went over. They're also in the document center, and there are the annual reports. So they go back to 2011 and up through 2019. So all those are available right there on our webpage.
Great, thank you. Melissa, anything else?
No, thank you. That's it for now. I just think that's an important part of the transparency. So I just want to make sure people know that that's available. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think our next step will be to start with our questions that were submitted. And Michael, I know that you did touch on some of them within the discussion or the presentation that you've already had, but could we start by going through those questions? We just to preface that, about a month ago, we started the process of asking community to submit questions, and those questions we asked for them to be submitted ahead of time as much as possible so that we could have time as a city, or the city staff could have time to answer it, and especially when it had to do with finding a location for the policy or having it come up to reference. So we will start with those questions, Michael, and then we will add in, I see that there is another question that's already popped up, but let's start with those first.
So most of the questions we'd received, I covered in the initial overview. They're more generalized questions. There were some questions on specific ordinances, and we'll hold those for other meetings when we can talk about ordinances, specifically parking. This was a specific question on crisis intervention team training. This is a type of training that's available for officers that gives them training on initial interactions with people in crisis. We do have that training. There was two parts of the question, also on de-escalation. As I mentioned earlier, de-escalation takes place in a lot of different training, leadership classes, and as well as some of the implicit bias training. But as far as a crisis intervention team, that is specific training that happens on an annual basis. Our goal is to have all officers trained in crisis as a crisis intervention team officer. Currently, we have 6 of our 14. Mostly that's due to the number of new hires that we have in the department right now. It takes a while to get them on the job through academy, into training with their field training officer, through that training, and then available for additional training. So it'll be a while before we can get back up to 14. However, that is the goal, and that's what we work on. Additionally, some of the other topics that we carried, this was provided by the chief, during their field training officer when they're out with their training officer, is on conflict and conflict resolution. So we actually have conflict resolution segments, verbal judo, which is utilizing verbal skills to resolve issues, leadership through service, dealing with people with mental illnesses, responding and diffusing to calls including violence, crisis intervention during domestic disputes, dealing with individuals who have mental illness and are acting violently, dealing with diverse conflict styles within the community, responding to special needs populations, and dealing with hostile witnesses and citizens. So those are some of the specific areas that answer that question on CIT and de-escalation training. And that's the only one we really have a specific answer for. The rest of them I kind of covered in the original overview.
Michael, on the crisis intervention team, are we utilizing the team out of Bozeman like we had in the past, or working with that team?
Yes, although that's a different kind of team. That's a CRT, not a CIT. And the CRT, we still do use out of Bozeman. They're our local one that if we need a response, that's who we will call.
Have we looked at having our own team, or what would be the process to have that happen so that I know sometimes timeliness is an issue when you're sharing. What is the process of us, is that a potential, I guess, of us having our own CRT?
I think Livingston Healthcare does have one. It's not the one that we're currently using. I don't think it's completely up and going in that functioning process yet. However, we are looking at different ways that can happen. Really, the largest problem is size of the city and or county versus the requirements to have a 24-hour team that can respond. You're talking just one person, you're talking entire teams that rotate on a 24-hour basis. So it's a pretty big commitment and takes a lot of personnel to do. But those are issues that we're looking at. I wouldn't say we have a very good solution to that yet. And I think any solution that we did look at would probably have to be in conjunction with the county as a service for the sheriff's office as well as the Livingston Police Department.
Okay, thank you. And so that's covering pretty much all of our questions that were submitted that he addressed either within the policy discussion or just now. So commissioners, do we have any questions to start? Because I know there's a few people who have requested a question or comment.
I'd be interested in knowing what the difference would be in the situation between using a CRT and a CIT teams.
Michael, can you?
Yeah, sure. So the CI team is, while it says team, is not actually a team. It's just an officer has the training or they do not have the training. So ideally, if it's that type of situation, we would respond with a CIT trained officer. So we can do that if one is on shift, and that's why we try to have as many trained as possible. But if we don't have one available, then we're not going to use it. CRT, I'm not sure. I'll defer to Dale on what would actually trigger calling the CRT from Bozeman and bringing them over.
So yeah, the CRT is the professional that comes over and actually evaluates somebody to see if they meet the requirements to go to Hope House or some other form of crisis intervention. So yeah, we utilize Bozeman's CRTs out of Western Mental Health for that. And there are certain requirements for that to happen. They have to be a danger to themselves, an imminent danger to themselves, or danger to somebody else, or they're unable to take care of themselves safely. So if somebody we feel meets those requirements, they will set up a meeting with the CRT professional.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else, commissioners, at this time?
Hey, Chair Hoagland, this is Melissa. I do have some more questions, but I don't want to take away from the public to ask their questions. I think we have some topics that I feel that we could explore at a different level back when we talked about union contracts. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now or if you want to open it up to the public and maybe the public will ask those questions rather than me.
I would say, I would love if the commission would start, some of those questions, because what I know is that we have had people talking to us about this issue in support of what we're doing, in questioning, and, you know, wondering what we are doing, and what we do as a police department in particular. And so I think you asking and starting those conversations would be great, because I
Okay.
think you could ask it for other people. They might have the same question, and
Okay.
they have come to you and each of us. So yeah, please start.
So I guess what I would start with first is, Michael, if you could, you know, I know we went over a lot of this already when we talked about the union contract. Could you provide an update of that process and how long the contract is for? I know it was a split vote, but it did pass. So just to give an update so that people that may not have come to that meeting are up to speed on that particular topic. And then I'll have some other questions that are outside of the logistics of that. Thanks.
So the collective bargaining agreement is passed for a certain amount of time. It's negotiated between the city manager and the chief of police and the police union. In this case, it's Montana Federation of Public Employees, Livingston Police Unit. I should be sharing the front page of this current agreement, which is effective from 1 July 2020 to 30 June 2024. These agreements can be changed in the interim if agreed upon by both the city and the union. So you can do a memorandum of understanding and change specific items if there's something that both units would like to address. I think an example of that might be the addition of the body cameras to the force. That'll be something that we will write an MOA on with the union so that officers know what's expected, what they're responsible for, those kind of things. So just looking at the table of contents, you can see most of this is administrative, union security and dues, non-discrimination, working conditions, holiday leaves, health, safety, and welfare, how overtime and call out is paid, policies, procedures, and regulations, management rights, how seniority works within the force, discipline and grievance procedures. Those are probably the two largest areas that people are interested in. Some job posting, the compensation, wages, health and wellness. And there are some items in the health and wellness that I think were pretty progressive as far as the city looking at some wellness issues for the officers themselves. Residency requirements, we have a no strike, no lockout clause, and then some legal mumbo jumbo. And then what I think is fairly unique to our collective bargaining agreement, I'm not sure how many other forces in Montana have them, I don't think very many, is the actual discipline guide, which outlines for the officers what kind of discipline to expect for what kind of actions. The real goodness in that is that that is pre-agreed to by the union, so it is usually given in ranges, but it's very thorough, and it's something that if you haven't had time to look at, I would suggest you go out and look at. They are very circumspect when they look at what they believe is acceptable behavior for the force. A lot of it both on duty and off duty. So that's a great thing to look at. Let's see. Let me scroll down and show you a couple of the areas that people are interested in. There's our list of holidays if you're interested in that. And that's workers' comp stuff. That's overtime. And this just says that we'll provide them a policy manual so they know what to expect on the job. That's the other manual we were talking about. Here's the discipline section. So this covers how we discipline and how that works. Discipline will be for good cause, meaning there has to be a reason. We're not just going to discipline for no reason. And according to the discipline guidance, here's our actual procedure for discipline. Allegations will be investigated by the department head, a designee, a supervisor, or as directed by the city manager. This employee will be advised of the allegations and she'll be given an opportunity to respond. We'll notify the employee if we're going to request an interview and talk about the terms and how that works. Refusing to answer questions upon demand is considered insubordination and will subject an employee to disciplinary action up to and including termination. So when people say that the union can stonewall investigations, they really can't. They have to answer, the employee has to answer questions or they will be found guilty of insubordination and they will be disciplined for that, which is separate than the original offense that they would be being investigated for. When they are actually disciplined, they can request an attendee of their choosing, coworker, an attorney, a union representative to be present. They are, however, not able to advocate on behalf of the employee. They are just there as support. This is one of the issues that we talk about a lot is the Garrity rule, which is the compelled statements. So that's saying if we're compelling them to answer something, we can't turn around and use that in a criminal investigation because that would violate the right to not self-incriminate. So that's one of the things that we talk about. And then once the investigation is complete, we'll notify the employee in writing of the investigation and then give them another opportunity. And they have a right to rebut the investigation. It doesn't change what we're doing, but it does get it on the record. And at any time during the investigation, the employee may be placed on paid administrative leave. This shall not be considered a disciplinary action. So we've talked about that a couple of times, but if during the investigation we don't want them working, we can either move them back into just a desk job or we can just give them administrative leave and say, don't come to work during the investigation. We'll let you know when it's over. And then again, once that discipline is decided on, it has to fall into one of these categories. And these are escalating. So verbal counseling, written reprimand, suspension without pay, demotion or a loss of duty, and then termination. If they disagree with the discipline, once that entire process is done, they can grieve it through the union or they can go to the police commission. We then have a grievance procedure that we would go through. The union's part of that. We're part of that. There's time limits on it, so it can't drag out forever. And most of them are pretty tight time limits. Most of the steps have to be completed within 10 days of initiation. And it goes up through the ranks again. They will grieve to their supervisor. If they're not satisfied with that answer, it can go to the department head. And if it's not satisfied with that answer, it can go to the city manager. If they're not satisfied with that, it can go to arbitration. But the arbiter cannot change city policy. So they have to fall under those things. So that is how a full disciplinary action would take place. You go through the investigative process first, then you go through the disciplinary process, and then if necessary, you go through the grievance process. You step through each of those methodically, and you get to the outcome that you need to. Here's some of the certifications that we ask officers to obtain and that we will compensate them for. All the post trainings, these are communication officers training, so that's for our dispatchers. And then things like first responder, EMT, a baccalaureate degree or associate's degree, and then a degree in criminal justice or law enforcement. And then we're working on a good governance certificate, which is more, works on things like emotional IQs, understanding different personality types. That's a 25% through hour. And then we do give stipends to the school resource officer, the detectives, the code enforcement officer, and the canine officer. I think those are the main things that people asked about.
Could you
This is a
share, excuse me, go ahead.
I was going to say, that's just the cell phone allowance, $50 per month, because we don't issue cell phones. We let them use their own.
Melissa, do you want?
Yeah.
What were you asked?
I have some. So this came before the commission. The vote happened. It was a 3-2, so it passed. Can you share the timeline for when this contract lasts through? I think is it through June 2024? Yes? Okay. So it's through June 2024. And
Yep.
then, you know, the questions, Chair Hoagland, that I really have are around process. So I've been doing some learning, and I'm wondering what our process is in Livingston, because I'm thinking about what I know and how other communities negotiate this contract. So I would like to hear, I guess, what the timeline is like. When will the negotiations begin for the next contract? How long do those last? Who's present? I don't think that the public goes to these, but I would like to know, I guess, if the public goes to those in Livingston. In some communities, they're open to the public. So I'd like to hear what the process currently is in Livingston. Thank you.
Michael?
Sure, thank you. So the process is the same across all the union contracts currently. They are not open to the public. We don't do public negotiations on them. The approval of them are public when they come before the commission, but not the actual negotiations themselves. Historically, these contracts have been opened up, and I'm talking about all of them now, police, fire, public works. They were opened up 6 months, possibly longer, prior to actually signing off on the new contract or when it was going to expire. The intent always being to complete negotiations for the new contract before the old one expired. So you probably start some initial, I would say just, informational exchanges and reaching out probably a year prior, 6, 8 months prior, somewhere in there. And I'd say for a lot of years, the process probably lasted a good 2 to 3 months of having meetings, going back, scheduling another meeting, going back, and kind of negotiating in that way. We've tried something new with both the firefighters collective bargaining agreement and the police department and communications officers collective bargaining agreement, which is basically called affinity-based bargaining. We actually had the Department of Labor come in and do some training on this particular type of bargaining. Its intent is to reduce or change the nature of bargaining from adversarial to more collaborative and basically interest-based. So instead of just picking a position and digging in, we really look at what is each party's interest, what are they trying to accomplish, and seeing if we can come up with a win-win instead of just trying to keep it, instead of just digging in and opposing whatever the other side wants. So that has actually significantly changed the way that negotiations have gone for both the last fire contract and this current police contract. Both negotiations were completed inside of 1 day. That's not to say that's all the time that was spent on it. There's some time to get that accomplished. You have to spend a lot of prep time, making sure that people have everything, that people understand all the information behind it. A lot of it is being transparent with all your information, whether that's budgeting information, any other information. So it's a more open, transparent, collaborative method. And it actually allowed, in both cases, us to come to an agreement with the firefighters union and the police union inside of a day, in some cases inside of a morning. And so those were completed, I think, a couple of months prior to this particular one, a couple of months prior to its implementation in July. And so you use that time frame to go back and make sure there aren't any typos, make sure that the actual typing turned out the way that everybody thought it was going to from the agreements we had. And then once those are issues are sorted out, then the unions will vote on it to make sure that they've accepted it. And then once the union has voted on it and accepted it, then we will bring it in front of the commission at that point for approval.
Chair Hoagland, can I still have the floor? So I was thinking, you brought up transparency, and I agree. I think that's like one of the critical issues that when folks have been talking to me in town, wanting to understand how we can make everything more transparent. And so I know that some communities do have open meetings for the negotiations where the public can be present and participate. So I think that would be a thing for us to explore, how we can move in that direction, so that the community can be involved. One thing that became clear when we voted on the union contract was that there seemed to be no room for negotiation or talking about what was in the document. It was really voting yes or no. But it didn't seem like there was much room for shaping that document at the commission. So the public didn't really have much influence or ability to participate in that way. So that's what I want to say about that right now. And then in the vein of transparency, I would like to talk about, so you've brought up, Michael, about when there's the difference between internal and external, the difference between like an administrative versus a criminal proceeding. So thank you. I think that is an important thing to understand where decisions are being made and why. I'm wondering, in terms of when there are complaints, are they concealed or are those transparent also to the public? Like when there is an investigation and it's internal, are those things that the community can follow up with, or like what's the process for that? And like is there transparency or not? And can you talk a little bit about that? Is my question clear? I feel like that was a little bit rambly.
I will give an initial stab at it, and then I'll turn it over to
Thanks.
Chief and maybe Courtney.
Thank you.
The investigation itself is not transparent. That's considered privacy information for the employee that the complaint is filed against. If something comes of that, I'll let Chief know how that goes. I know the complainant has a way to find out if anything came of it. I'm pretty sure, but I'll turn that over. But most of the information of the actual investigation is privacy information and will not be released. Chief, fill the rest of us in on that one.
So yeah, as far as a complaint against an individual, we do let the complainant know the outcome and what actions will be taken. But yeah, not necessarily the actions, but the results of the investigation. We do let the individual who made the complaint know that. As far as anything that turns out to be a criminal complaint, we do refer that to other agencies, sometimes the sheriff's office. Most of the time, we include DCI, which is the Division of Criminal Investigations, the state investigators. And they might have somebody else do the investigation if they're busy. But as far as criminal investigations, it's always an outside entity or agency who will do those investigations.
And
Courtney, do you have anything to add on that one?
Me or Courtney? I couldn't hear you, Michael.
I was just asking if Courtney had anything to add on that from a legal perspective.
There, I figured out how to unmute. I would say that it depends on where the litigation is, whether it's civil litigation or whether there's a pending criminal case. And the outcome of that is oftentimes public in different ways, depending on what court it's in. If there is a criminal case, then the criminal case will be in a public file, either in city justice or district court. Those files in those courtrooms or in those court offices are public. The investigation file is confidential criminal justice information. There is a process to go about getting that, and it's through district court as long as the investigation is pending or the litigation is pending, and it is thereafter a decision that either the chief or I would likely make. The resolutions are public if the people involved in the civil litigation decide for them to be. With litigation outcomes, oftentimes the commission is going to see it at some point to make a decision. And certainly the commission is involved in the litigation holds because they're part of the budgetary process. If there's a litigation hold, the commission approves that litigation hold through the budget process. And if there was a settlement, the commission would ultimately approve the settlement. Settlement agreements are often private, but in legislation around police misconduct, there are oftentimes what are called consent decrees. Those consent decrees are basically the settlement agreement reached between the parties, or at the end of the court case, if there is a verdict, sometimes the court will impose a consent decree based on the needs in that individual department or in that individual agency. Those are definitely public, and the whereases for the implementation that happens are almost always contained within that consent decree. Did that answer your question, Commissioner Newts?
I hope so. I'm doing my best to represent the people who asked me questions, so I'm sure they'll pick up the slack if I'm dropping the ball.
Melissa,
And-
can I ask before we move away from this?
Mhm.
I know, because that was a question that was brought to me in the past, and so the first step, if there was a complaint, the first step goes to who and how? That's my first. So with a complaint, where does it go first? Does it usually, someone calls Chief Johnson? How is that done? I know as an educator, we actually have a form that is included in all handbooks, student handbooks, and staff handbooks, and also accessible on our site. So I'm just wondering, when complaints happen, what's the first step?
So they come in a variety of ways. Oftentimes they call dispatch and they get transferred to me, but any officer, we do have a form also. It's in our policy manual. If anybody wants to take a look at it, it explains the process, how to go about it, what the process of it is. But anybody can get a copy of that, and they just fill it out and return it, and then we initiate the investigation. It's also on the city's website, on the police department's website, I believe. So that's another way to access that form also.
Great, thank you, Chief. Melissa, go ahead. Sorry, I wanted to
That's
stay
okay.
on the subject.
That's okay, because it's falling right in to the questions I'm asking too. So I was going to ask Chair Hoagland, I guess I was going to ask what counts as a complaint. So that's kind of what the chair was asking, because I know sometimes we get emails, we collectively being the commission and some city staff. And so I'm wondering, does that count as a complaint if they're not calling dispatch and they're not filling out the form? Are those investigated when officers and incidents are named? And I don't want to get specific about the incident or the officer. I'm talking process.
So as far as the stats in the yearly report, those are only the formal written complaints that are received by this department. If somebody calls up, I always ask them how they would like to proceed. If they want to fill out something formally and have it investigated, or they have the option of just letting me know, and then at which time the investigation is minimal, but I do always speak with the officer who the complaint was about, advise them of the complaint, and let them know that if they were the only ones there, so if it happened, then we need to adjust whatever it was that they were complaining about. But I always talk to the officers. The formal complaints are the actual investigations that we do and they add to the yearly reports.
So just to make sure I understand, it sounds like if somebody calls dispatch or somebody fills out the form, that's what we'll see in your annual report, and that will have a more formal investigation process. But if somebody sends an email and is like a complaining isn't the same as a complaint. So if somebody's complaining, it wouldn't necessarily open an investigation and be reported and investigated the same way that dispatch or the paper or online form. Is that, but you would still follow up and talk to the officer and say, so-and-so told me this happened, you were on duty, you were the officer. So you'd follow up, it just wouldn't make the stats. Is that right? Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm following. Okay. Another question I have, and I'm not sure if this is for Michael or the chief, but it's my understanding that there's also some external body or group that oversees complaints in Montana. And so I guess if you could explain that, like every time there is a formal complaint, that triggers a process that's also outside of the city, I believe. Does this sound familiar? I believe it's called Peace Officer Standards and Training. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
So yeah, Post has the ability to investigate any complaint. As of right now, the way that they receive those complaints is from the administration of the department or other officer. It can be from other individuals outside the agency, but typically it comes from the officer supervisors or administrators. Any daily complaint that we deal with doesn't automatically trigger a Post investigation. Post has their own criteria. If it violates the code of ethics or something so egregious, those are the ones that they will investigate. Any criminal allegations, they will investigate.
So it sounds like what you're saying is whoever is senior to the officer with the complaint would notify Post, and it may or may not open up an investigation at Post depending on the complaint, like the criteria, if the criteria were met. Is that right?
Basically, yeah. For it to be forwarded to Post, it has to meet certain criteria, yes. And that criteria, it can be for off-duty behavior, it can be for on-duty behavior, it can be for criminal aspects. Typically, it's not policy violations, but it does, it's a broader view of, like I said, their ethical and moral actions and or criminal actions.
Okay. So it sounds like, just thinking about transparency, Chair Hoagland, I guess when I'm thinking about the union contract and the, in terms of complaints, there's a lot that the public wouldn't have access to for various reasons, whether it's just the process that we're going through or the legalese things that Courtney was talking about, like the different legal reasons why something would or would not be public. And then another question I have, this is in the line of transparency in these topics, is so hypothetically, if there was a situation and an officer did have a grievance, and it sounds like they have a choice whether they want to go to the union or the police commission, and they usually go to the union. So I'm wondering, in the cases where an officer brings a grievance, is either of those spaces open to the public?
So the grievance procedure is usually paper driven. There aren't really meetings. They'll write a formal grievance, present it to their supervisor. The supervisor will present a written response. If they continue to go up the chain, they will provide another written grievance. The next one will provide a written response. If it goes to arbitration, then so those aren't really public. I mean, you could FOIA those documents. I think they would be releasable, but I would have to check with the lawyer on that one. And then if it goes to arbitration, arbitration is not open to the public.
Well, and isn't there the issue of personnel? related information. So when it's personal or personnel related, there's a lot of restrictions because of the rights of each of the individuals.
Yeah, most of the grievances would fall under
So
the
that
privacy
often the
constraint.
public isn't involved.
I think that's my main questions about transparency. The other questions I have right now are about anti-bias training. So I'm interested and curious, and I want to keep these conversations going about what anti-bias training looks like for Livingston staff. I think there's a whole suite of options, and like Michael already mentioned, in terms of longer sessions or more frequent shorter sessions. And I just want to make sure, I guess, when we're talking about these issues, because they're obviously some of the most important issues we could be talking about, that we're really using the most effective training for anti-bias. And I don't have the answer to that right now, but I don't want to just be like efficient and cost effective. I want to make sure that we're being like effective in terms of like how we change our behaviors as a community to be actively the best Livingston we can be. So I think that will warrant more conversation. But I just wanted to bring it up so I didn't forget right now. That I'm really curious to hear what other people have to ask. I feel like, you know, the other thing I would ask about training, and this will be my last thing for now, is when we find that the police or city staff or whomever within our jurisdiction is showing bias, what is the follow-up to that? Do we have any procedures in place if someone is showing bias when they're working for Livingston? So that would probably be for Michael.
Michael, are you answering that?
So we talked a little bit about the discipline guide for the police department. So this is specific to the police department, but one of the items that they have is ethnic bias. And you can see that there's a violation description. So we have improper remarks showing ethnic or cultural bias, show display materials showing ethnic or cultural bias, and knowingly or improperly detaining someone due to ethnic or cultural bias. So you can see the ranges there, and I'm going to scroll you to the top real quick, so don't get too sick there. So this is set up, the discipline guide is set up as we talked about the different levels of discipline. So A is verbal warning, B is written, C is suspension, D is a longer suspension, E is a very long suspension, and F is termination. So if you go back down to ethnic bias, depending on the severity of the infraction, you can start immediately with suspensions. And if it's improperly detaining someone due to ethnic or cultural bias, termination is actually within the first range of disciplines for that particular violation. So, and you can see it escalates quickly all the way up to certainly termination for even just improper remarks if it's a continued behavior. And D, if you remember, is a full, I think it was an 80-hour suspension. So 2 weeks of suspension, or I'm sorry, 3 to 4 day suspension without pay. So that's just an example of where we have it directly in the police discipline guide. There's similar items in the city policy employee handbook. You can see that there's also gender bias and sexual harassment that has the same sort of ranges for same sort of activities, same sort of behaviors. And I think that's all the ones that deal directly with bias. So they are absolutely covered in our discipline guide, and those are the ranges available to us upon finding that kind of behavior.
Think, Mike,
I think you froze, Chair Hoagland.
thank you. That was actually a very helpful document chart. Melissa, enough of an answer for you? Is there anything else you'd like to ask on that?
Can you just repeat what you said because you froze for a minute in there, your audio?
Me or him?
Chair Hoagland, your response, you were frozen, so I only heard part of what you said.
All right. Is there anything else on that subject that you would like to ask?
I thought I was done with questions, but I'm not. I had one other thing that has been confusing. So I want to know who decides how many officers we have, because I think I might have heard the contract helps determine, and I think I might have heard that it's administrative. And so I just want to understand if maybe it's a combination or maybe it's one or the other. I want to make sure I'm clear on that point.
So the actual size of the force or the number of officers is set, I think, through a multi-layered, multifaceted process. The union contract isn't really one of them. The chief determines what he believes the proper structure is. That comes to the city manager for inclusion in the budget. And then because it really is a budgetary item, it also goes to the commission for final approval. So examples of that would be adding the assistant chief position. That had to come before the commission. So the chief said we need it. Well, the position was always there, but that's a technicality we don't have to worry about. But when we wanted to fund it, chief said this is a position we need to fill at this point because of where we are with the force. They came to me as a city manager. I sat down, looked at the numbers as far as the budget and determined if that was feasible, and then came up with a plan for that. And then that would come to the commission for final approval. So while the commission doesn't directly move pieces around in the police department, they kind of do have final say as far as do we have the ability to fund the positions that we want. So I'd say it's a collaborative process between all three levels, the commission, the city manager, and the chief.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair Hoagland. I think I'm good for now with questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Any other questions from commissioners before we open it to public questions? I know we have a few people that have comments or questions. Okay, I think we have James Bennett. Name and address, please. James, you are muted.
There we go. James Bennett, 608 Comet, Livingston, Montana. Just one brief comment. I think that from a lot of the people I've had communications with, we realize that we put a large, are we gone now? Oh, you're putting my time up there. Put a large amount of responsibility on our police department. And we all realize that our police deal with the harshest elements within our community and that they are the buffer between the everyday citizen and those who engage in criminal activity. So we really rarely see those problems and many times are oblivious to them. Most of the citizens I've talked with, or all the citizens I've talked with, are extremely supportive of this police department. It would not support a diminishment of policing or funding within the city. And I want to just pass on to all the police and the police department a big thank you for your service that you provide to us 24 hours a day. Now, I did have a couple questions that one was directed to the chief of police, and another one, a question either to the city manager or chief of police. So this one's specifically for the chief of police. Over the last 20 years of your service in the policing profession, how has the training of police personnel been improved and enhanced?
So thank you for that. As far as training, yeah, we have, I mean, it's been improved by having our training actual budget increased, allowing officers to go to different areas to get training on specialized areas. Part of that, I guess, is whenever they go to these trainings, they're expected to come back and share what they've learned with everybody else. So it's not just the one officer getting the training. They're expected to come back and at least share the information with everybody else, so we all get a snippet of that type of information, that type of training. The post is also enacted over the years that every officer is required to have 20 hours of training per year, post training. We also have every month 4 hours of training within our department on various topics, policy stuff. We have outside entities come in and present to us. So it's improved, you know, quite a bit in the 20 years. We've always had the 4 hours block of training, but allowing our officers to attend different specialized training has been huge.
Great, thank you. And the second question, either for the city manager or chief of police. For years, we've operated under the 14 person level that would, or that's our target person level, that would be the ideal or best number of personnel for our community. Is that a minimum requirement or a maximum requirement? It seems like when I was on the commission, it was always difficult at times to keep that number. And secondly, it didn't always seem like it was the best number. It seemed like we were always trying to reach for a little bit more. Could either of you address that?
I'll address that from the city manager perspective. I think the department is properly sized right now for the job we're asking it to do. We have added a couple positions over the last 3 years that we've transferred from other areas, the code enforcement officer being one of them. So that was a significant improvement in the capability when we've been able to keep it filled. And I think that is probably the biggest struggle right now, is actually filling all of the available positions. We have a fairly young force right now, at least I would say the bottom half is fairly new, and we've had some turnover. And in this environment, I would expect that kind of turnover to continue. We just tried to fill a position and offered it to 2 separate candidates. Both of them turned it down, and so we'll be starting that process over again. So recruitment will probably be a challenge for a while, but as of right now, I'd say we're pretty well sized. You know, it would be nice to be at full complement, but I think we're doing well with what we have. Chief, you want to hop in on that?
Yeah, I mean, as of right now, we are 1 person short. Again, we're trying to fill that position. And because of that, we have shifts where there's only 1 officer working alone. So ultimately, we'd be able to have at least 2 person on at all times for safety reasons and call and response times. 14, to get back to your question, I think 14 is the minimum that we would ideally have. If in, you know, anytime in the near future budget allows it, I mean, I think an expansion by 1 or 2 officers would sure be helpful.
Thank you, James, for your questions.
And thank you for answering those questions. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Next, we have Joseph, I think, Bullington, if I'm correct. Go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, I was thinking I had a few more to go, but I'll try. Let's see here. So the main things I want to talk about tonight are transparency and the public's right to know about the police department. It's not because I think that other topics aren't important, but those are just the things that I want to focus my questions on. I'm coming to this as a journalist, and so when I see that the city has a use of force policy and a disciplinary policy, as Mr. Cardos went over before, my natural response is skepticism. One thing that's glaringly absent from Mr. Cardos's list of policies is a transparency or public records policy. From the journalist perspective, I think it's all well and good to have a disciplinary policy and a use of force policy, but if we can't see how those policies are being applied, how they're being implemented, we really can't tell whether they're working or not working, or whether they're being effective or ineffective. So those are the things I want to ask about. And I'll probably address these pretty much straight to the city manager, unless somebody else has a perspective on them. I think some of the questioning from the commissioners went over, covered some of this ground before. I'm going to ask a series of questions. I don't know if I want to stop the clock during the responses or what, but I'll start off with just asking specifically, how does a citizen file a complaint against an officer or the department? I think we went over some of this before. And if the answer is just by a variety of methods, including a form that's somewhere on the website, I guess I'd like to challenge the city and maybe the commission, if necessary, to make that process very clear for the public. But do you want to respond to that question, or do we already cover that enough?
I don't have additional information on that. So if you were comfortable with the answer that was given, I don't have anything different.
And I think Joseph, you just stated what you feel we need more of. So
Sure. We'll just move on to the next question. And I was a little bit confused in some of the discussion that came after that. It seemed to me like we were saying, like the consensus was that those complaints against alleging misconduct against police officers are not public information. Is that correct?
It depends a lot on specifically what you're talking about. The complaints themselves, I don't know if we released the forms. The investigation process is not released. That's internal personnel policy, privacy issues. If it's a criminal issue, those are available through the courts. You can gain information through it that way. And as I think Chief Johnson said, the complainant does receive a answer on what the, not necessarily the actions taken, but the outcome of the complaint is.
Okay. And so to follow up on that, so it's to understand that internal disciplinary investigations and any kind of disciplinary action that is like involves, say, enforcing the use of force guidelines or anything like that, none of that is available for the public to review.
As far as the investigation goes, that is correct.
Okay. So I guess I'm going to address the rest of my comments to the commission. So, and I know my time is running out, but I think someone was taken up with questions, so I'm just going to keep going here for a second. I want to read from the open government guides put out by a journalist's guide put out by the Malloy Law Firm, and the writer is citing Montana Supreme Court decisions, and he says the Supreme Court has made it very clear that internal investigations of law enforcement and of public employees must be fully disclosed to the public while the investigation is ongoing, as well as when it concludes. The outcome of the investigation is not relevant. In each of these cases, the court found that the individual officers has very little expectation of privacy and the public has a fundamental right to know what public employees are doing. Specifically now I want to read from a ruling from the Montana Supreme Court, which says it's in a case called Great Falls Tribune versus Cascade County Sheriff.
Wait 1 second. So I know that sometimes our time is taken by the answers to the questions. I think as far as statements, you've sort of run out of time, but can you hold them? Like hold your statements so we can make sure everyone is getting their questions in their 4 minutes. And you did have your questions answered, and then we'll move to potentially more time at the end. Would you mind, so I can keep it fair as far as within the time limits? You're still on mute, Joseph.
I think you must have muted me. I feel like my time was taken up by responses from Mr. Cardos. I don't know why that should count into the clock.
No, it didn't, but then you already had like an extra minute, so I'm trying to make sure we're fair on that. And I have a feeling that you have more than like a few minutes or a minute's worth of information you'd like to share. And I don't want you to not have that time, but I also want to make sure everyone else has their 4 minutes first. So like kind of starting the process over for that.
Okay, if that's the best way to do it, I will wait.
I appreciate it. We are, first of all, before we move on, we usually take a break at 90 minutes so that people can take a break. And it has been requested that we have a break. And then, like I said, we want everyone to have their time, their 4 minutes, and then we can open it up to extra time at the end. That is our right as a commissioner within the forum to make that decision. So let's take a 5-minute break as requested, and then we will be back in 5, I guess at 38. Okay.
To see if we can identify common gaps in services and then figure out what the best model is to plug those gaps.
Well, I think it might be worthwhile looking at it not as a problem, but as an opportunity. And so perhaps I could send this article around to you, Chair Hoagland, and and just maybe start thinking about it in terms of what can be done, not in terms of how much of a burden it's going to be on your budget. So, it seems like, we don't need the full amount of corresponding that they have in some place like Missoula, but I certainly think it's worth beginning a conversation. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. We next have, looking down the list, Jonathan.
Thanks for taking the time to do this. I was hoping that this would be more of a forum and not limited to 4 minutes and things like that. But I have a number of questions I am wanting to ask, and so I guess I was wondering if you talk about the complaints, which I agree with Joseph, should be public record, and you talk about use of force. Does the police department ever systematically go through the complaints and the use of force incidents to identify patterns that might reflect disproportionate impacts associated with certain things that they're doing, like strategies and tactics or certain specific officers? one thing that I was also wondering is what types of steps are the police taking to promote a collaborative relationship with the public? And I was wondering for Chief Johnson what barriers he sees to good police community relations in this community, and how the police can help eliminate some of those barriers. And I guess I was also wondering that a lot of people think that, I mean, just the community relationships, I think, is just such a big part of this. And I'm just really interested in what more can be done to eliminate a lot of these, to just eliminate racial profiling, eliminate profiling based on different things, and promote the public's trust in police. So I guess just a lot of these are just outreach questions. So what is the department doing for outreach, and then and then the systematic reviews to identify patterns that might be creating a lot of these problems, and just kind of what types of reviews you're doing?
Thank you, Michael. I mean, Jonathan, would it be okay if they answered your questions? And then you made the statement about it being a forum, not a timed forum. Like I already stated, I just want to say that I look, and I think the commission would agree with this, that we look towards more conversation even towards the end of this meeting if needed. I just want to make sure everyone has their 4 minutes to start and their questions, especially the questions. So Michael, did you get all of those questions down pretty well, or do you want Jonathan to repeat any of those?
I think I'll take a stab at them, and Chief can add in anything that he thinks is useful. As far as the systematic review goes, that's part of the annual report process, and it's also part of the review of every incident. We just did a review on a high-speed chase that was done with multiple parties. Everybody goes through it. So we review every incident as it happens. So it's kind of a hot wash procedure, and then annually review the incidents as in aggregate to see, looking for those patterns or things that Jonathan's talking about. I would quibble a little bit with his question about what would we do to reduce racial profiling, because I don't think there's any evidence of racial profiling at all inside the Livingston Police Department, and I think that can be seen in the numbers as they bear it out. Excuse me. And while that may be true, it's still something that we train on. Obviously, it's something that needs to be continued and brought with new officers to make sure that environment, that culture is maintained as we go through it. And I think they do a very good job of instilling that with the field training officers, and then moving on to some of the annual trainings that we're talking about. We do, and this answers a little bit of one of Commissioner Newt's questions earlier, we also do in-person trainings, but they're just really hard to do right now with COVID. But those are things that we do. We bring in speakers, nationally to cover certain items. And if we identify any gaps, then we tailor our training to those gaps. As far as public outreach, and Chief can, chime in on this and cover some of the other things they do. But the police department does a lot as far as public outreach goes, whether that's, crosswalks for Halloween, or it's the Guns and Hoses basketball game, Coffee with a Cop. I don't know how many people have attended that, but they do that annually usually, where they go to a local establishment and just sit around and are available for questions, for people to come in and sit down and have a cup of coffee. Bobby, our old canine, and Rhino, our new canine, are often used in a lot of demonstrations. As far as youth go, the school resource officer is a great resource for the community. I think the school specifically, but really overall the community, because Officer Williams has built those relationships with the kids. So when interactions are needed, we have someone that already knows them. So I think we do quite a bit of public outreach. I mean, there's always room for improvement. And if people have specific ideas, I'm sure Chief would be happy to entertain them, but I'll turn it over to him just in case I missed something.
So yeah, those are some of the big ones. We try to get down to the farmer's market every year This year, we haven't been able to with COVID and other staffing issues. There was a national night out that we participate in, which is a community event. Just come down and have a barbecue and kind of get to know individuals on the department and in the community. The bike patrol, that's an excellent way, and that's one of the main programs, or the benefits of that is an excellent way of interacting with the public. There's no cars there. It's just a person on a bicycle. Whole lot easier to talk with somebody informally and just get to know people. So we do try several things. When it comes to things like Coffee with a Cop and some of these other things, unfortunately, one of the bigger obstacles is very few people show up. I think probably the last time we did this, there was 3 individuals that showed up specifically for it. Because we have it at a coffee shop, we do get a lot of foot traffic that we're able to interact with, and they wonder why the cops are there. So that, you know, sparks some discussion and all that. But we haven't had a whole lot of luck with the community chiming in either. So, but we do try, and I'm always open to other ideas and suggestions.
Sorry, I lost my screen for a moment. Jonathan, was there anything else in your questions that you feel wasn't covered or need more clarification on?
No, I did come up with a follow-up question based off of the response, if that's okay. And thank you for taking the time to answer my questions. I was just wondering about the school resource officer and how, I guess I was wondering, how do you deal with students who might get in trouble with things like having a vape or something like that? I mean, do they automatically get tickets, or is the discipline handled in school?
I'll cover it quickly, and then I'll let Chief chime in if I get any of it wrong. But I think in general, that is a partnership between the school resource officer and the school administration. And they really work well together in determining how to address things. So it's not rigid, it's not automatic, but usually the kids are known, and between the administration and our officer, they sit down and figure out how they would like to go forward. And in general, the schools take the lead on it, and the officer is there to support them. Chief, you want to correct anything I said?
No, that's right. Unless it's something, you know, criminal or I guess large criminal offense. But yeah, some of these small misdemeanors, small things that are actually criminal, the school has a big say in it, and they do have what they would like to see done, and that's always taken into consideration with the school resource officer. They have identified several things that they would like to see pushed through the criminal justice system on a routine basis for all infractions. Smoking is one of those. The school has taken the stance that anybody caught with tobacco or vaping, they prefer that they are charged criminally. And when you talk about juveniles being charged criminally, it's not really a charge, it's a referral. We refer them to the juvenile probation officer, and they're the ones who are in charge after that. Just about every instance that we have, other than, again, major felonies, are handled informally. Once we make the referral to them, we're out of the process. Juvenile probation works with the family with whatever resources they need to get the help that they're doing. So,
Thank you.
And I'll add to that, just as someone who's in that system. We work closely with the police department, and it's a very good relationship with our school resource officer, but there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes, and a lot of people have mentioned today just having, you know, the social work, and we've talked about this in the past, of who is that person that can connect between the victim or the victim's family, or the, you know, something like that and the police and helping the victim at the same time. But when it comes to working with youth, we meet weekly. We have a team that, including probation and school resource officers, administrators, and counselors, and we work to help students and families before things get to a bigger level. We also have DFS involved sometimes, and so we're all trying to do proactive work to help students. So we do that weekly at the high school, at the middle school, and we do often have, not often, but on occasion have what's called a YINI, or a youth in need of intervention, which is about getting them into some type of support. And we work with probation, work with the police to help them so that we can support them before things get to a bigger level of where felonies and such. So we do a lot of what people want in our community, and I just don't always know if people realize the work we are doing.
Chair Hoagland, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure, great. Go ahead.
So would that data be recorded in the demographics with the annual report for the police? Like, is that information in the demographics of those students that are they also tracked, or is that not included?
No, not because student and juveniles are different than adults. And so no.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Courtney might want to address that more, but yeah, just for their privacy and records, are expunged at a certain age. So it keeps, gives them a chance to start over. Anything else on that? All right. I think we next have Rick. Go ahead, Rick. I think you're trying to unmute, it looks like. We'll wait for a second. It's on my iPad, it's at the top. There you go.
Okay, I think I'm on mute. I have something that I think would probably be a relatively easy question to answer, but I'll preface it by saying that so early in the year, when some of the conversation started about some people felt that they were felt like they were being mishandled by the police. I happened to notice in the Enterprise that the police commission had an opening for an applicant, and I thought, I wonder how many people even know there's a city a police commission. I will tell you that all the years I was on, 5 years that I was on city commission, I didn't know there was a police commission. With that, I think what I'd ask Michael to talk about is, so who are the members of the police commission? I gather there are 3, and what are their terms, and what are their requirements to serve? I think a lot of people just don't know that they could serve or could apply even, because they don't, it's just posted in the official notices in the paper. And given that there are just 3, um, is there any possibility that that could be expanded? I just think that under the circumstances, the police commission might be one window that we could use to improve our transparency, shall we say. So I'll let you talk about that, Michael. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Michael, could you expand on the police commission more than we have addressed already, and the potential for, or the size of the commission having 3 members?
So hold on just a second. We'll actually share the information up our website because I'd like people to be able to go back and find it again if they're interested. So if you go to our website under government, city commission, boards and committees, and police commission, you can see the members and their terms right there. It also tells you how they're nominated and confirmed. So the city manager nominates and the commission confirms. And then you can, if you'd like to, you can reference the MCA on what the requirements are. And that is pretty much set by state statute. So we don't have a lot of flexibility in number of members or duties in that case. So in that case, we're constrained by the state law. But if people want to learn more about the police commission, I would encourage them to check out the state law or talk to one of the members. And if they're interested in that in future years, if the members aren't being reinstated, I always encourage people to try and volunteer in areas that they're passionate about. So if it's police, then I would encourage you to volunteer to evaluate our candidates as they come through before we hire them.
Can I follow up then?
Yes, I still have time.
So is there any way that people can we how do we talk to the police commissioners? I guess I'll put it this way: do they have any real input or impact on, or can they have any real input or impact on the police policy and stuff like that?
So the police commission isn't going to have any specific input into police policy. Policy is written by the chief and approved by the city manager. And some of this falls out from our form of government. So because we're a commission manager form of government, the manager is in charge of all staff. So all staff, to include the chief of police and the officers, fall under the authority of the city manager. So most boards, so if you think of boards or committees, they're advisory boards to the commission. So they can really only advise on issues that the commission has authority over, and that doesn't include personnel. So we certainly will take input, and the commission obviously has the authority to direct me as to what they would like in the types of things they want covered in policy. They just don't have the authority to set the actual policy. So really your best way to influence police policy is, one, talk to Chief Johnson and say, hey, here's a concern I have, and I'm sure he would be happy to have a conversation with you. And that's the most effective way to do it, because you're going to get the no kidding reasons that that policy may or may not work and what would have to happen to make it work. So that's what I would actually encourage you to do. If you don't talk to Chief Johnson, you can always come and talk to me. That's probably going to be a little longer process because you'll bring your concerns to me and then I'll go and talk to Chief Johnson. So I make sure I understand it before I give you an answer. But you can, I mean, you're more than welcome to do that as well. And always you can go to your commissioners and bring it up in a commission meeting. Any one of those ways will work. The most effective is just to engage with the chief directly, because he's going to be able to really, he's the one that writes it. So he's going to be able to explain it to you the best, and he's going to be able to affect the change the quickest. And I think at least follow the intent. If he accepts your input and says, yeah, that's a great idea, it can happen fairly quickly. So my recommendation is go directly to chief.
Okay, thank you. One other quick question, maybe Michael, you could tell me, would any of this change if we had the charter form of government? We have a city charter.
So that's an interesting question, and the answer is maybe, but it would depend on how the charter was set up. So yes, you'd have more flexibility. You can't be less restricted than state code, but you might be able to change certain aspects of it. That's a fairly technical legal question, and it would take some research to give you a really solid answer on it. But the answer is we definitely would have more flexibility than we do under our current form of government.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Michael, I'm going to ask, so something on the police commission question that Rick had. It's under MCA 7-32-4151. When I looked at it, I didn't see anything about number of commissioners. I know we have had 3 for a long time. Is there a requirement, or am I missing that requirement of, I know 3, would that be the minimum, or is there a requirement for within that at all?
Okay, so if you look here at 732-4151, it says a 0.3 residents. So it doesn't give you a minimum. If it said a minimum of 3 residents, then that would be, you could appoint more, but when it gives you a direct number, then you have to stick to that number.
Okay. All right. Well, and I saw that you had shared some of that Montana code, but that section or that part of it wasn't in it. So thank you. So there's the answer, Rick, on the size.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. More research to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions or requests for community to chat, but I think, or within the chat, but I think at this point, commissioners, and then public, if we have any more questions, thoughts, please do. I think that I want everyone to feel as if their thoughts are heard. And this is a forum versus a commission meeting, which I'm glad it's not a commission meeting. But commissioners, anything from our other commissioners? I know Melissa had quite a few questions. I've had a few. Anything that you'd like to share at this time? And I'm going to open it back up to, I know Ben has, Joseph has more that he'd like to say as well. And then I see Jenny Jo also put in her name. So commissioners, first of all, anything at this time?
I'd just like to point out, there have been a number of mentions of bias and bias training. I believe in the 2019 report on police call-outs, there were 0 bias complaints. So I don't think that is a major issue. Thank you.
Well, we hope that's because of the training, right? Let's see, who else? We had, let's have Jenny Jo, since she hasn't had a moment, and then, like I said, opening it up to others that had other thoughts they wanted to continue. So Jenny Jo, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I actually have 3 questions that were just kind of sticky. I had a bunch of questions, but you did answer them as you went through all of the different policies and things. But I don't know if this is covered and I just missed it because I did have to jump off for another meeting for a little while. Does the Livingston Police have qualified immunity from civil suits? That's one question. And then is there a policy that bans chokehold and strangleholds with the Livingston Police? And is there also a policy with a duty to intervene? So if an officer sees another officer using excessive force, do they have a policy with a duty to intervene with that officer? Those are my 3 questions.
Thank you, Jenny Jo. Michael, could you please answer those questions? And I think one might be potentially Courtney.
I will let Courtney answer the qualified immunity question, and then Chief Johnson can answer the policy questions.
So qualified immunity allows for some persons to be immune under the law from civil suits unless the plaintiff can show that the official or the individual officer violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights which a reasonable person would have known exist. And it's a form of sovereign immunity that's allowed under Montana law as well as federal law. And it is not absolute immunity, and it's intended to protect officials who make reasonable but mistaken judgments about issues and questions that arise, sometimes where things are happening very fast, other times where they wouldn't have been reasonably expected to know the answer. And it doesn't protect the government itself from lawsuits arising out of official actions.
Does it protect the individual officers?
If they acted in outside of clearly established statutory or constitutional principles, then it would not. If they acted within those obligations, then it would.
Okay.
So it's not a yes or a no, it's a it depends question.
Okay, thank you.
And then as far as the other stuff, as far as our use of force, we're trained, what we use is what we're trained at the academy. We have yearly training as far as defensive tactics, but what we train on and what we use is what we are taught at the academy. And chokeholds or vascular restraint are not taught there, so we don't use them, no. The other one, a duty to intervene. While we don't have anything written written down as far as that kind of goes along with the previous question about qualified immunity. If something is so egregious and a fellow officer does not intervene, they also will be, held accountable and potentially civil litigation also. So that is something we have been, kicking around is how do we write that in policy? So that is a very good area that we're going to be exploring and trying to find some model policies to emulate.
Can I just verify that so the chokehold or strangleholds are not taught, but there's also not a policy banning that?
We don't, again, nothing written, but we are authorized to use what we're trained at the academy.
And only the things that you're trained, or?
Right, yes, correct. Okay. We have two officers who are defensive tactics instructors, and they get their training from the Montana Law Enforcement Academy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny Jo. Let's open it up to anyone else have questions, comments. I know, Joseph, you had wanted to finish up some of your thoughts. Please state your name. I forgot to ask that. Please always state your name and address. No one else?
Hi, Becca Frick, 125 South 8th. I'm just wondering what y'all think would be next steps in this conversation, given some of the commentary tonight, and I'd love to hear what the commissioners or city manager, Chief Johnson, think would make sense. I know that we have an invitation to come bug y'all in your offices, but yeah, interested in your thoughts.
Do you want me to answer that, everyone, or can someone else start and then I will?
No,
They will.
I'll jump in.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I guess first off, this isn't what I was, anticipating when we first started talking about this. But what I would really like to see is once some of the COVID restrictions are lifted, we're able to sit down, in the Civic Center, someplace, community room, wherever, and actually just sit down and have a dialogue. That was kind of my, I guess, thought of how this was going to run. And I think ultimately that is probably the best way to get some information across and get some good feedback and input. So ultimately, that's what I would like to see as a step down the road. Again, once some of the COVID restrictions are lifted, being able to do something of that nature. And again, if it goes along with Coffee with the Cop and we can sit down and have a cup of coffee and discuss something, that works too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would second that. That would be great to have this feel like a conversation. And I think we're doing the best we can with COVID and Zoom and technology and all of that. Yeah. Any other thoughts about next steps? I mean, I think one thing for some of us who are new to civic engagement is, there's obviously being generative as citizens and also taking cues from y'all about how we can be better engaged citizens and support this process. And so that's part of why I'm asking as well, is what we can do to be better partners in this.
I appreciate that question, Becca, because I see us moving forward through time, continuing our conversations. I think this commission is very open to not just listening to a few people, but listening to the community and trying to get things moving forward based on what the community wants and needs. And I think we've done a lot of that, and I see us working together down the road, having those casual conversations, maybe having a group formed. That's often what we do, but a group, and it could be an informal group versus a committee to start. And we could look at what are things that we as a community want to see when it comes to anything. I mean, including our police. And so how do we want to move forward? In this case with the police. And, I think one of the things that I keep seeing is that, or hearing, is we do a lot of things right. And our police are, in my opinion, and what I've worked with, they're amazing to work with. And I work with them pretty closely in multiple realms. And there's always respect and knowledge and caring. But I also like that we're putting their feet to the fire to prove that they're doing what they should. And so I appreciate us continuing those conversations. And I don't want us to ever go idly and passively through and say, oh, they're fine, they're great, everything's great, because that's not going to help us to change or become aware. And same with education, right? We have to look at all things, question it, and question it because we should. It's not a bad thing to question it. And I think I'm just going to go off a little bit on this, Becca. I'm sorry if you have any more else to say, but as soon as this forum was asked for, it was interesting to me that like the defund the police statement was made immediately, just because we're having a dialogue and requesting a dialogue, which I find interesting because I don't see that at all in this process or from the beginning to now. And I really appreciate that we are having these conversations and that we need to, because it's the right thing to do. to always be looking to be better at what we do. And I mean that we as a community, as someone who works with the police and supports them, and as a commissioner, believes in the work they're doing in our community. But on the other hand, you know, this is how it should be done. So I just wanted to say that because I think a lot of people made assumptions that it was going to be one way or the other. And
Yeah.
there's nothing that we did that said that, I feel. So thank you.
Yeah, I think we're in a really awesome spot. It's such a special community. And as someone who's also had to call our police in the middle of the night when someone was in our driveway and have the patrolling officer that showed up was wonderful. And we felt a million times safer that he was here. So I want everyone to know this comes from a place of respect and also a lot of pride in our community. So thanks y'all for putting this together, and excited about more conversations.
Thanks, Becca. Joseph, are you still there? Did you want any more time?
I am still here. Yeah, I'll finish my thoughts if there's time now.
Yep, go ahead.
I think I forgot to introduce myself the first time, which is a mistake, but it's Joseph Bullington. I live at 105 North C Street here in Livingston. Let's see where I was here. So when I left off, basically I want to focus my comments and questions on questions of transparency and public access to records. And I was reading at some length from a Supreme Court ruling, and I want to go back to that because basically I want to recap sort of what we heard from Mr. Cardos and from Chief Johnson. My understanding, based on what they told me, is that what they told all of us is that basically none of these records related to complaints against police disciplinary proceedings, internal investigations, none of the things by which we would determine whether the department was upholding its code of conduct or whether it was living up to its disciplinary guidelines. None of those things are available to us as journalists or as the public. I'm really confused as to why that is in this city, because that's not my understanding of state law. And so I want to ask questions specifically about the city's interpretation of law there. My understanding, obviously not anything like a lawyer, but my understanding is shaped by some Supreme Court rulings I've been reading through today. One, for example, which is the one I was reading before, says the issue is whether the privacy rights of the individual police officers exceed the merits of police disclosure of the names of the officers and the details of the investigation. And the Montana Supreme Court concluded that the public has a right to know when law enforcement officers act in such a manner as to be subject to disciplinary action. In other places I was reading from earlier, the other Supreme Court rulings have found that the public has very clear a right to internal investigations of law enforcement and disciplinary procedures, regardless of the results of those procedures. So a quick list of questions to close out my second comment here is, let's see here, find my questions here. Time here. So I want to ask the city about its interpretation of Montana open records laws and why so many police records seem to be exempt in the city's interpretation. I want to ask if is that a necessity of state law, or is this something the commission can act on and specifically say, in our city, we're going to make these records public. I think those are the two main questions I want to focus on. And the third one I want to address to the commission, which is, which is basically to follow up on the second question. I want to ask the commission whether they are comfortable with the city's answers on this and whether they want to pursue that more. And I just want to close by saying, outside of the kind of oversight that's allowed by giving the public access to these kind of records, which allow them to determine whether the department is living up to the guidelines, it's guidelines around use of force and discipline. Outside of that kind of oversight that is allowed by those records, the only perception that a person is going to have of the police is going to be based on their personal experiences in the community. And I think that people's personal experiences are going to be very skewed depending on who they are, where they live, and what their background is. And I think we should keep that in mind when we're determining how important these records are to getting a clear picture of what the police force actually looks like in the community and how it interacts with the community. That's the end of my questions.
Thank you, Joseph. Thought-provoking questions. Thank you. Michael, I'm passing it to you, and then
Chairman Hoagland, can you hear me?
yeah. Yes, hi Patricia. We have a couple questions that we're going to address first, and would you like to speak after?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Let's finish up answering those questions from Joseph, and I'll come back to you, okay? Go ahead, Michael. Please help us with those questions.
Sure. In general, I try not to riff on Supreme Court cases freestyle, but if there's certain concerns about certain cases, I'd love to get those in writing so we can review them and provide a legal opinion. You know, there's a lot of different case law out there, and it depends on which ones you look at. In general, the standard Montana policy and the policy the city goes by is if the right to privacy of the individual outweighs the public need to know, then we don't release the information. That is as general as I can provide. Obviously, every case is different, and there's varying interpretations of how that goes. And that's why there's varying lawsuits, and if people want specific information. And we can certainly review those, and I would appreciate, you know, just getting those in writing so we can review the specific cases, the specific circumstances under which those were tried, where they were tried, those kind of issues, to see if all those laws are still in place, and just get a true legal opinion on it. So that would be, I think, probably the most useful, and we can provide that to both the commission and the requester simultaneously, and that would probably be the easiest.
Let me follow up on that really quick, Michael. My understanding of the case law, obviously I have no room to speak on case law, but the interpretation that's taken by freedom of information organizations in the state is that the interpretation of the case law is that, specifically addressing what you're talking about, the specific conclusion is that in cases of public employee misconduct, the public's right to have oversight over its public employees specifically outweighs the rights to privacy of those individuals. And I mean, is that something that the city disagrees with?
Well, how do you interpret Billings Gazette versus City of Billings?
I have no idea. I've not reviewed that case.
And I think that's the point, is this is case law, and it's complicated, and there's many facets to it. And we can't just interpret one case. We have to interpret the entire case law that's out there. So, like I said, I would love to see that. I think Billings Gazette versus City of Billings presents a very different face forward to what disciplinary actions are releasable and what aren't. And I think that's a great conversation to have. I just don't think this forum's a great one to have, you know, Supreme Court case law debate.
Okay. I think this is exactly the place that we should have the debate about what public records relating to police are public. I don't know where else we would have that debate. I'm specifically asking for transparency, which, and I think you've failed to address that utterly tonight.
And
well, actually, we've addressed that quite specifically, and you know, this would have been a great question to submit ahead of time, because we could have prepared an answer for you. And I don't know why you didn't.
I'm not going to submit, I think, a question ahead of time to have it screened. That's not a public or democratic forum in my mind.
Well, then you can't get an off the head answer if you don't know what the answer is.
I'm going to interrupt. Okay. So Courtney, I think that there's another this question that we can start to answer immediately. And that is, can you clarify on the right to know part, just according to Montana law? Okay. And then also the role, because part of the question Joseph asked was like, who tells who how it will look? What is our role as a commission? Do we have any rights in making a decision that would change that right to know? And so, which they're all sort of related to what we're talking about here. So Courtney, can you help with that?
I think so. So let me first break down what it is that's being requested as far as the public's right to know. If it is general government information and is not personnel, something that would go in somebody's personnel file, and is not criminal justice information, there are very few limits to what can be requested or received. If it is a personnel issue, then it goes through the process of weighing the merits of what it is that's being asked for and the public's right to know. That is a process that can go through the district court at any time, and that anybody has the right to ask the court to review based on what it is that they're asking for. If it is basic criminal justice information, the journalists review that all the time. And if Chief Johnson wants to speak to that, he can. But the call records are something that journalists have reviewed in the dispatch area for 30 plus years, as far as I know. Confidential criminal justice information is different. And that is basically investigative information. And that has a particular process that has to be followed based on whether or not it is a current case or an old case, whether it's been fully adjudicated or not. That process is also overseen by the district court, and anybody can ask the district court to weigh the merits of a particular request for disclosure. There is case law that goes along with that. The City of Billings versus Billings Gazette case being the most recent precedent set by the Montana Supreme Court. Because the statutes are very specific about what things are confidential criminal justice information, what things are regular criminal justice information, what things are personnel records, and what things are general governmental information. The commission really doesn't have any way to intervene in that process unless it was the commission asking the city for records, which the city was refusing to provide, and I'm not aware that that has ever happened. Even in the case of personnel records and confidential criminal justice information, there's a review process through the district court that allows somebody in Joseph's position to ask the court to weigh the equities and the merits and to potentially disclose that information if the court believed it was relevant.
Thank you, Courtney. That is helpful. Sorry. Joseph, I know you had two main questions. Did we miss any part of those questions? And then I feel like you had another something in addition to it, but I'm losing it.
I think those are the two main questions. I was just trying to determine what records are public and whether the commission has any power to decide those things. And it sounds like the answer to both those questions is no records almost, and related to police discipline, and that the commission has no power. Am I misinterpreting that, Courtney?
Yes, absolutely, you're misinterpreting that. The district court has the right to review that. You have the right to ask the district court to review that in any instance in which you believe that there are records in which the public has a right to know that clearly exceeds the right of the individual privacy. But
Okay.
nobody has the right to invade individual privacy without due process.
So it requires the court to weigh in every case.
Not necessarily. If there is a request and a denial, then the court can weigh in.
Okay. So let me just ask very specifically about a very specific type of record, which I think probably most people attending this forum would be interested in the status of it. Just like a record, like the complaints we've been talking about tonight, like public complaints against the police. We've been told that those are not public information. And is that's a case where we would need to ask the district court to determine whether it could be released or not? Is that it?
I think that you're missing.
You have to get back to me. That's okay. I don't.
Well, I think what you just said was complaints are not public information.
Am I misinterpreting that?
Yes, because the complaints are being reflected in Chief Johnson's report. So that there is a public process by which the public would know that there have been complaints. And if there is some specific reason for somebody to ask for more information, then they would need to go through the process that allows due process to happen around an individual request.
Okay.
And in addition to the privacy of the officer, in the case of complaints, there's also the privacy of the complainant. So it's not just an issue about the officer, it's an issue about the complainant or possibly other parties that are involved with the complaint if the complainant wasn't involved in the incident. So it's not just a privacy issue for the city, it's also a privacy issue for the people that are filling out the complaint.
I think we next have Patricia. Thank you, Joseph. Patricia?
Am I unmuted now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about my voice. I've lost my voice to a blood thinner. Having attended most of the city commission meetings for the last 20 years, having been a city commissioner, I have watched this city change markedly. When I was on the city commission, as a city commissioner, we took so much more responsibility. In fact, we were required as city commissioners, one of us would be part of the negotiation, for example, of the police contract. And then another commissioner would work with the fire contract and so forth. That doesn't happen anymore. And it really is reflective of the change in administration, not the change in the law itself. So I'm concerned, for example, about the police policy coming from the police chief to the city manager. And when I was on the commission under Steve Golnar, there was a review for police policy. I don't see that anymore. So I have questions about what happened in between. I don't think the law changed. I think it is more a question of the style of the city manager or something else, but I think it's worth looking into because it concerns me that the police chief writes policy and then the city manager oversees that policy, and then who reviews the police chief and the city manager at the state level? Where is the oversight? That's question number one. Number two, how would this change if we had a mayor? Would policy processes change if we had a mayor with a city manager under the mayor and the city staff? And I'm just real interested in an answer to that. And the third question I have is, my understanding is that a while ago we had the right to know about disciplinary action, and now I don't see it happening at all with the police officers, and I have been involved in that. And then third, I'd like to know, do the police have to take into consideration the, for example, disabilities of people that they encounter? So those three questions. Where does police policy get reviewed by the city commission? Because it used to be reviewed by the city commission. And to me, the city commission is relinquishing so much of its oversight responsibilities in this regard. So three questions, and I only have a minute and 3 seconds left.
Well, and your time will be, the answers aren't part of your time. So
okay.
Can you go ahead and answer those 3 questions, please? I think it might be a little of Michael and maybe a little bit of Courtney.
All right, I copied down 4 questions, so I'll try and answer all 4 of them in the way I can. The first question was who oversees it at the state. As far as the state level goes, our policies have to meet state law requirements, and they have to be in accordance with POST. So POST, you know, as far as the actions of the officers go, our policies have to be consistent with POST so that the actions of the officers are consistent with POST. That would be the state level. Also, if there's significant issues, obviously there's DCI or any other agency that would want to review it at the state level. Department of Justice could review anything they wanted as well. So those are there. They don't happen very often, but if needed, they are. As far as the commission isn't involved in the actual policy development, but they are certainly involved in hiring and firing the city manager, who is in charge of the policy. So if the police department isn't what they want it to be, and they have communicated that to the city manager, and the city manager does not do the work that they wish to have done, while they don't directly oversee the policies, they certainly oversee the outcomes. And that is why that is their version of oversight into the policies for the police department. Same with the city manager and the chief of police. If the chief of police isn't addressing policies as needed according to the city manager, then the city manager can find a new chief of police. What was the third question? Right to know disciplinary action. I don't think that, I'm not sure which law you're referring to, but I'd leave that one to Courtney. But again, the basic concept is if the need of the public to know doesn't outweigh the privacy concerns, then the public doesn't get to know. It's a pretty high standard. There's very little stuff we don't release, even things that would be privacy issues. If we gave specific details, we extrapolate the personal information out of it and give conglomerate details so you can see the issues even if you can't see the people involved.
So a fix to that might be, for example, go to the legislature and get that revised at the legislative level, right?
Anytime you don't like a state law, you absolutely should work through your legislatures to get that adjusted at the state level.
Yeah. And the other was mayor. How does this change the mayor system?
Before you get to mayor, I'll talk about the disability. Yes, it depends on what you mean by have to. That is part of the policy. Is use of force policy is which I read earlier in the meeting. You have to take into account disabilities or abilities of the person being arrested as you choose use of force. The answer to that question is yes. And the 5th question, which was the mayors, it really depends on your form of government. Mayors exist in many different types of forms of government. If it is mayor such as Bozeman, no, it really wouldn't have any effect whatsoever. If it's a mayor as Missoula, it might, but all the issues still need to be in accordance with state law. So it depends on what form of mayor you're referring to.
Yeah, inevitably, a mayor form of government has more transparency in it, just by its nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. All right, anyone else? Because I think we should start wrapping up pretty soon so we can not go too late into the night, but I want to make sure everyone has their last thoughts or any last thoughts. Jenny, Joe?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just have a follow-up question with the grievance policy and the grievance procedure. So as I understand it, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly, if somebody does have a grievance in writing, there are 5, because I looked at the form online for the Livingston Police grievance procedure, and it looks like there are 5 different levels of disciplinary action, but it says that the person who files the complaint or the grievance is not, that information is not given to them, what level of disciplinary action has been taken with the person. So I wonder, I'm thinking, like, how does that feel, or how would that person have a sense of resolution if they don't know what is being done? And maybe I'm missing something there, but I think that it would be hard to feel a sense of resolution if, you file a complaint and you don't know what actually happens with that.
Good point.
Chief, do you think you could answer that, or I don't know who to answer
That's
that.
probably more a city policy question because it applies to more than just the police department. It applies to all city departments. And the short answer is it may not be as satisfying as you would like, but it's a balance between the rights of the complainant and the rights of the employee. Obviously, a termination would be easy. Like that would be probably known even if we don't release the information. You would realize the person wasn't there anymore. But the intent of the discipline below the level of termination is rehabilitation of the employee. And so their privacy and their dignity and their ability to be rehabilitated requires some information not to be released. And that's really the issue at hand, is the balancing of the two rights of privacy and of satisfaction and resolution, which is why we can give information that action was taken so that the complainant can know that their issue is being addressed and that they were heard, but it doesn't rise to the level of giving them exactly what happens, whether they received, a written counseling or if they received a performance improvement plan and what the aspects of those performance improvement plans were, if they were required to go to substance abuse counseling. Those are privacy issues that wouldn't be released. So it may not be as satisfying as you would like, but it is the best we can do in balancing the two competing priorities.
All right, thank you. Jenny, Joe, is that all from your question?
Thank you, yes.
Thank you. Okay, any last thoughts or questions?
Sure. Chair Hoagland, can I have the floor?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Melissa.
Hello?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to some of the public's comments that without having eaten into their 4 minutes, just to catch them up on some things we've talked about. So Joseph earlier was asking about ways to report during his first comment. And I wanted to let him know, besides the form or dispatch, Michael and I, the city manager and I, have talked about how sometimes people are not comfortable going to, or going to the chief. They're not comfortable going to men to file a complaint for certain reasons. And given that the city manager and the police force are all identify as men, that some other avenues for citizens that Michael identified would be going to the city attorney, Courtney, or Lisa, the HR within the city, that those are 2 other avenues. And again, in order for it to be counted, details would have to be taken and written down. They could also come to a commissioner if we had the capacity to help them, like myself or you, Chair Hoagland. So those would be some other options. So just wanted to share that. I also was hoping from Joseph and Michael's conversation that they could both email us the documents that they were referencing, just like the commission. Joseph mentioned a case, and I think that Michael also mentioned a case, and it would be just good as commissioners to be on board with what they're referencing. Could you both send those to us?
Yes.
Thanks, Joseph. Michael, are you able to at some point link that to us also? I think you mentioned Billings Gazette versus the City of Billings.
Done.
Thank you. Oh, wow. I just got a bing. Thanks. I also wanted to let Mary Ann know, she was talking about mental health professionals. And Mary Ann, I don't know if you're still on, but that's something that the commission did talk about at previous budget meetings. And so that conversation, and this gets to Becca, who was asking what's next, that conversation is still going to be happening, like exploring what's possible with Livingston and the different options. I don't want to spend a ton of time explaining what we've already talked about at previous meetings, but that's ongoing and that's going to come up again. And finally, I totally agree with the chief. I think, first of all, I want to acknowledge that you're working to get some things in writing that were brought up tonight. So thank you, Chief Johnson. I think that'll be really great. Like you mentioned, the duty to intervene, figuring out how to put that in written policy is one example. And I really appreciate and agree that more dialogues in multiple formats would be fantastic for our community. And that would be a great example of the police force, like Jonathan was mentioning, really working to connect with the community. So I think for me, Becca, this is like the first conversation we're really diving in deep about this process. I think we've identified some things we could talk more about, like how would it be possible to have union contract negotiations be open to the public? How would that work for us and what would that look like? That's just like one example of a direction I think it would be great to move towards. And I think that we can do this again. I think that this is an important enough topic. Definitely that would be great to connect like this again and keep talking about what's possible. And I know it's going to happen because in part we talked about it at the budget meetings. So I think that's all of the little tidbits I wanted to make sure to address. Thank you, everybody, for being here and participating tonight.
Thanks, Melissa. I think we had one more person that was trying to call in. So
yes, it was me, Linda Ulrich.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
I have we've been addressing all the issues based on the subject, as the police would call a person. But I'm wondering what is in procedures to help a police officer who, and I speak from, I have a relative and a good friend who are on the Bozeman police force. So I hear the scuttlebutt from them on their PTSD issues that I'm wondering, how does the police address that from the police officer? What kind of help do they get? I don't need a very involved question, but is there some kind of avenue for police officers? And they deal with tremendous stuff, as my relative says, you never know in a domestic dispute what's going to come at you and how it's going to turn out. But what is done for the police officer? Because a lot of police officers can get burned out very quickly, and that leads to the wrong kinds of actions on the police officer's part and things getting escalated, at least in big cities. We don't always have that here, but what do we have in place? And I guess this would be for the chief. What do we have in place to get our police officers the kind of help they need on their end of it so that they don't get burned out and they don't do the wrong thing and they do the proper procedures as taught to them at the academy and whatever training they get from your department. And I live in Emigrant, and I'm just a very concerned citizen, and I thank you for letting me ask this question.
Thank you. Chief and Michael. Chief, do you want to start with that, or Michael?
I'll start out real quick and then I'll turn it over to Chief. I shared with you on the screen, this is part of the CBA, and this is our mental wellness incentive for our officers. So basically it allows our officers to attend 6 sessions with a mental health professional each calendar year to qualify for this incentive. And if they do and they provide that documentation to the chief, they will get basically comp time for doing that. So it's actually kind of a double incentive. It incentivizes them to go and just have regular checks on their mental well-being, and it rewards them with more time off, which also helps their mental well-being. So it's a great thing that we actually have put into the collective bargaining agreement. And that's just one example. Chief, you want to give any more information on that?
That was one of the main ones. I'm also working on a policy dealing strictly with mental health and PTSD for officers, since they are subject to such traumatic things. So yeah, I've used some model policies given from the Montana Law Enforcement Academy to help guide a policy that I'm about to present to Mr. Cardus about this particular topic of mental health with officers.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks, Michael. And thank you, Linda, for that question. Any last thoughts?
Okay, Chair Hoagland, if I may, I had a comment and a question. I just wanted to, I wanted to commend Chief Johnson for his comments a few minutes ago. Actually, Commissioner Newts stole my thunder a little bit. Talking about some dialogue. I think that's something that we're going to need to do in the future, and I think that's probably a big part of what people are looking for, is just to have some dialogue. And it leads me to my question, that I think about how our policemen are no longer what you would call Officer O'Malley doing his beat on the street any place. And so we don't get to know our officers at all. And maybe that's part of the modern view of looking at policing, that we don't want our policemen to be buds with our community. But at the same time, in a small town like this, I think that there's a lot of value in people knowing who their policemen are and having some relationship with them. And that leads me to the question of what are your concerns about turnover? I think maybe the mental health aspect and what you talked about earlier touches on that, but I think turnover is an issue. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, absolutely. Retention and hiring is an issue, especially in these current times. It's really hard to get people to apply to a job that's being demonized, basically. So, but yeah, retention is an issue. It has been for as long as I've been here. We do the best we can, and I think with some of the training that we do and giving officers those options, it helps. And we do have a lot of benefits that other places don't, training being one of them. So I think that helps with the retention, but unfortunately in this profession, there's always going to be some, because after several years, people just realize that it's not for them, and it does take a toll on them personally and physically and in their personal life. So yeah, it does do that, and we do the best that we can, hopefully with these things that we're implementing in the CBA and this new policy that'll help address some of those issues.
Thank you. I would love to see us talk about actually planning, maybe as soon as we're able to actually have in-person meetings, that we start doing some planning for a conversation, series of conversations. This is really tough by Zoom, but thanks.
Thank you, Rick.
I'm gonna leave you.
All right. I think, is that it?
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
Hear me.
Yep, go ahead.
Just wanted to see if this commission is open to doing what we did, which was being part of the negotiations for the different departments, because I found that was one of the most enlightening things that I did as a commissioner, and that's the way that the commission can keep its hand on the pulse of the actual goings on of the different departments. So there is no reason that the commissioners cannot participate in negotiations for the union contracts. And I just find that one of the most valuable things that this city could do. Just want to throw that out there for consideration.
Thank you for
stopping us from doing that.
Is there anything stopping us from doing that according to the legal routes? I feel like as we've been in negotiations before, as in both sides of things, it's pretty uncommon, but I'm not sure why. So maybe we need an answer from Courtney on that.
We did it. We did it for years, and each commissioner was assigned a different contract to help negotiate. So it was an educational process for the commissioners, and there was not a contract that we didn't have commissioners involved in the negotiation of that contract. So obviously there's no limit as far as state law is concerned.
Well, I'm wondering, Courtney, could you answer anything you know on like the role and responsibility of commission and or other the public in their right to participate? I guess I'm unsure how to answer it myself. So could you help with that?
Courtney, before you jump in, I just want to cover one thing real quick, and I'll let her cover the legal aspect of it. If commissioners sat in, and I think they did, as Patricia was saying, they couldn't actually negotiate because they are one of a commission. So they have no authority on their own to negotiate. So they would sit in to receive information, but the actual negotiations are left to the chief executive. So while they can attend, they cannot actually be negotiating on behalf of the city. And I think there is some state law that covers that. If you want to talk about that, Courtney.
So under Title 39, Chapter 31 of the Montana Code, the representative of the public employer who is authorized to bargain is the chief executive. And then there is one exclusive representative that's allowed in addition to the chief executive. And it may have been that prior to having a full-time accredited HR person, that a commissioner may have been that other person that was with the executive, but that law hasn't changed since at least 1975. So if there was a point at which the city was not following it, I'm not aware if that was the case or not, but it's one person plus the chief executive.
Thank you, Courtney. All right, we're at 8:12. We've been at three plus hours. So just to wrap up and just picking up on some of the key points, and I know, Melissa, you already stated a few. We're looking forward to a dialogue-based future meeting, and hopefully in person, where maybe utilizing spaces that we can distance and where COVID is gone, but that would be a great part of it. But at this point, trying to figure out a space where a public meeting could happen. There has been requests too on how can there be a group or some type of citizen group working with the police to have open dialogue. We discussed again, and I think this was brought up multiple times, on the possibility of the social worker or some type of mental health based worker that would help be that mediator somehow between the community and the police and assisting both. In giving more opportunities for public outreach, I think that we have quite a few opportunities, and Chief was saying he would love some ideas. I had also on duty to intervene some questions on that and maybe some clarifications on what that looks like and can look like according to policy. Then like policy review and the role of the commission and the community in policy review, which could all be part of our future thinking and planning. Did I miss anything as far as commissioners? Any other commissioners have anything that I missed, and just kind of wrapping it out?
I would say the negotiations. Some cities do public negotiations.
Is that in Montana, Melissa?
I don't know all the cities in Montana, what all the cities in Montana would do. That takes some investigation, but I know some communities do public negotiations or open to the public negotiations, rather.
And actually, I did have that noted, so thank you. I missed that on my list, so thank you. So questions on that and that possibility? All right, anything else? Okay, sounds like nothing else. We look forward to organizing a future meeting. We are in the middle of September and thinking maybe into, you know, months coming up into maybe November. We have a lot of other meetings with our growth policy and other important meetings too, and we'll put this very important meeting in the future as well. And maybe the future of this type of forum, I think, could be a regular part of what we do as a community and as a commission and city, on finding middle ground and working together to make sure that we are doing the right thing. Any last thoughts before we finish up?
Darrell, this is Quentin here. Thank you very much. Job well done. I enjoy the public input and stuff like this. This is a great beginning. Everybody was thoughtful and considerate, and this is the way to move forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Quentin. Okay, if that's it, we will close this forum at 8:16. Thank you everyone for participating, and keep in touch.
Thank you.
Good night.